Hello everyone! In this video, we will go over some common mistakes that beginners make in French. So let's go through the common mistakes. So the first mistake I wanted to talk about is je n'ai pas un instead of saying je n'ai pas deux. While in French we say things like j'ai un chien, j'ai un frère, j'ai un livre, if you want to use that in the negative, so to say I don't have any or I don't have a book, a brother, etc., etc., then in French we say je n'ai pas de livre, je n'ai pas de chien, je n'ai pas de frère, and so on and so forth. And the word de in French will be the equivalent of any, as in I don't have any brothers, or I don't have any books. Having said that, there are cases where you would say je n'ai pas un livre. For example, you could say je n'ai pas un livre, j'ai deux livres. So you would be saying I don't have one book, I've got two books. So the second mistake is when people say j'aime le français and pronounce the S. In that sentence, the S makes it sound like you're saying I like French women. I'm not blaming you, but if you want to refer to the French language, then you should say j'aime le français. But of course, if you like both, there's nothing stopping you from saying j'aime le français et les françaises. Mistake number 3 is saying je n'ai pas fait beaucoup. If someone asks you what you did last weekend or yesterday, then answering je n'ai pas fait beaucoup is a little bit strange in French, because normally when you use the phrase beaucoup, we expect you to say beaucoup de, so a lot of, and then the thing that is a lot essentially. So for example, you could say j'ai fait beaucoup de révisions, but you can't just say j'ai pas fait beaucoup or je n'ai pas fait beaucoup. What you should say instead is je n'ai pas fait grand-chose, which in English is something like I didn't do great things. It sounds a bit weird, but in French it's very natural. So, je n'ai pas fait grand-chose. Mistake number 4 is to pronounce the ENT at the end of verbs. In French, you normally pronounce the ENT at the end of words such as vraiment, tellement, intelligent, etc., etc. But when it comes to verbs, you shouldn't say things like ils mangeant to say they eat, or ils parlant to say they speak. Essentially, the rule is that when you're conjugating a verb at the third person plural, so they form, then you shouldn't be pronouncing the ENT. You should say il parle, il mange. I know a lot of you are confused by this because you think, well then how can I tell the difference between il mange singular and il mange plural? Well, on its own you can't. The only thing that will help you is the context. And that's kind of tricky because you can't hear the difference when you say it, but when you write it, you have to remember to put the ENT at the end and the S after il. I'm going to go a little bit further than that. When you're conjugating the verb manger, so it's je mange, tu manges, il, elle mange, nous mangeons, vous mangez, il, elle mange, then you will notice when I said it that je, tu, il, elle plural all sound exactly the same, and you should never try to make them sound different. If you pronounce them differently, it will be a bit confusing for native speakers. Well, saying mange so many times has made me hungry now. Mistake number 5 is to mispronounce un and say une. This pronunciation mistake can make what you say a bit ambiguous sometimes. For those of you who struggle to pronounce the sound un, a way to practice and test you doing it right is to block your nose and then pronounce it. So if I say un, you will see that the air will come out of my nose. Un. And that's how you sound like a clown. There's one thing to know though, is that sometimes in French we will link the word un with the word afterwards if that word starts with a vowel. For example, if we take the word avion, which is a masculine, a plane, then we say un avion. But we're not saying une avion, careful, we're saying un avion. So maybe you can think of it as un avion, un avion, un avion. Again, this will make your French sound much more natural. Mistake number 6 is to say rencontrer mes amis. When you want to say in French that you're meeting with your friends or you met your friends, you don't use the verb rencontrer. Rencontrer is normally used when you meet someone for the first time. So it's a bit strange for French people if you say rencontrer mes amis, because it's like you're meeting your friends for the first time, and by definition, you don't meet your friends for the first time, right? Instead, the verbs you can use are voir or retrouver. For example, you can say j'ai retrouvé mes amis or j'ai vu mes amis. And mistake number 7 is to pronounce the letter H in French. In English, of course, the letter H is pronounced. So for example, you would say hotel, host, hospital, history, etc., etc. But in French, we never, ever pronounce the letter H. It's just not a sound that exists. So we do write it, but we don't pronounce it. So that means that we would say things like l'histoire, history, un hôtel, a hotel, un hôpital, a hospital, etc., etc. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that you've learned something new. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like and leaving a comment as well if you would like to connect with me. I will see you next week. Salut!